In the grand halls of Valdoria's royal palace, where ancient traditions have governed for centuries, a young princess is about to challenge everything her ancestors built. What happens when respect becomes a weapon, and a child's word can topple the most powerful advisors in the kingdom? This is the story of how Princess Evangeline changed the face of royalty forever, one bold decision at a time. The morning sun filtered through the ornate stained glass windows of Valdoria Palace, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floors where Princess Evangeline walked with purpose. At 12 years old, she possessed an unusual combination of her mother's grace and her father's unwavering determination. Her auburn curls bounced with each step as she made her way to the royal council chamber, where she knew Lord Chancellor Aldrich would be conducting his morning briefing with the senior staff. Evangeline had been observing the palace dynamics for months now, ever since her mother, Queen Isabella, had begun including her in more official functions. What she witnessed troubled her deeply. The way certain officials treated her mother with barely concealed disdain, the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when the Queen entered a room, and, most importantly, the blatant disrespect shown during formal ceremonies. Lord Chancellor Aldrich, a man in his 60s with silver hair and cold gray eyes, had been serving the crown for over 3 decades. His experience was undeniable, his knowledge of royal protocol encyclopedic, and his influence among the noble houses substantial. However, his attitude toward Queen Isabella had grown increasingly problematic since King Frederick's recent illness had elevated the Queen's role in daily governance. The incident that would change everything began 3 days earlier during the Harvest Festival ceremony. As Queen Isabella had approached the ceremonial podium to address the gathered citizens, Lord Aldrich and several other senior officials had remained seated while everyone else rose in respect. The slight was subtle enough to avoid direct confrontation, but obvious enough to be noticed by those paying attention. Princess Evangeline had been paying very close attention indeed. That evening, she had approached her mother in the Queen's private study, a cozy room lined with leather-bound books and family portraits. Queen Isabella sat at her mahogany desk, reviewing documents by lamplight, her elegant features showing the strain of recent responsibilities. "Mother," Evangeline had begun carefully, "I noticed something during today's ceremony that troubled me." Queen Isabella looked up from her papers, her blue eyes gentle but tired. "What is it, my dear?" "Lord Aldrich and his associates didn't stand when you entered. Everyone else did, but they remained seated as if." Evangeline paused, choosing her words carefully, "as if you weren't worthy of their respect." A shadow crossed the Queen's face, and she set down her pen. "Evangeline, court politics are complicated. Sometimes what appears to be disrespect is simply a matter of different interpretations of protocol. But, Mother, you are our Queen. Whether father is ill or well, you deserve the same respect afforded to any monarch. Isn't that what you've always taught me about dignity and self-worth?" Queen Isabella smiled sadly. "You have a keen eye, my daughter." "Yes, I noticed it too. But Lord Aldrich is a powerful man with many allies. Sometimes we must choose our battles carefully." This conversation had planted a seed in Princess Evangeline's mind. Over the following days, she began documenting every instance of disrespect she witnessed. She noticed how Lord Aldrich would interrupt the Queen during council meetings, how he would exchange meaningful glances with other officials when she spoke, and how he consistently undermined her authority through subtle gestures and comments. The final straw came during a private dinner with visiting dignitaries from the neighboring kingdom of Astoria. The dinner was held in the formal dining hall, a magnificent room with crystal chandeliers and portraits of Valdorian monarchs dating back 5 centuries. Queen Isabella, wearing a stunning sapphire gown that complemented her regal bearing, had been engaging the foreign ambassadors in discussions about trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Lord Aldrich, who had been invited as senior advisor, had spent the entire evening correcting the Queen's statements, questioning her decisions in front of the guests, and generally treating her as if she were an inexperienced child rather than a reigning monarch. The foreign dignitaries had seemed uncomfortable with the obvious tension, and Princess Evangeline had watched her mother's confidence visibly deflate with each interruption. After the dinner ended and the guests had retired to their quarters, Princess Evangeline found Lord Aldrich in the palace library, where he was reviewing documents for the next day's council meeting. The library was one of her favorite places in the palace, with its towering shelves filled with ancient texts and comfortable reading alcoves. Tonight, however, the familiar space felt charged with tension. "Lord Aldrich," she said, her voice carrying authority that seemed beyond her years, "I need to speak with you." The Chancellor looked up from his papers, his expression showing mild annoyance at being interrupted. "Princess Evangeline, it's quite late. Shouldn't you be preparing for bed?" "I'll go to bed when our conversation is finished," she replied firmly. "I want to discuss your behavior toward my mother." Aldrich's eyebrows rose in surprise. "I beg your pardon? You heard me correctly. Your behavior toward Queen Isabella has been consistently disrespectful, and it needs to stop immediately." A condescending smile spread across the Chancellor's face. "My dear child, you seem to have misunderstood the nature of my relationship with the crown. I serve the kingdom of Valdoria, and my loyalty is to the throne itself, not to any individual who happens to occupy it temporarily." "Temporarily?" Evangeline's voice grew cold. "My mother is Queen of Valdoria by marriage, by law, and by the will of our people. Your loyalty should be absolute, and your respect unconditional." Lord Aldrich stood up from his chair, his imposing height meant to intimidate. "Princess, you are still a child. When you're older, you'll understand that effective governance requires honest counsel, even when that counsel challenges the monarch's decisions. Your mother, though well-meaning, lacks the experience and political acumen necessary to navigate complex state matters." "What my mother lacks," Evangeline said, her voice growing stronger, "is the proper respect from her own advisors. How can she govern effectively when her senior staff undermines her authority at every turn?" "You're being dramatic," Aldrich dismissed. "I have always conducted myself with proper decorum." "Really?" Evangeline pulled a small leather journal from her pocket. "Because I've been keeping track. 3 days ago, you refused to stand during the harvest festival ceremony. 2 days ago, you interrupted Mother 7 times during the morning council meeting. Yesterday, you questioned her judgment regarding the grain subsidies in front of the entire Agricultural Committee. And tonight, you embarrassed her in front of foreign dignitaries." The Chancellor's face reddened slightly. Those were matters of state importance that required clarification. "No," Evangeline said firmly. "Those were displays of disrespect disguised as counsel. And they're going to stop." Aldrich laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the quiet library. "And what exactly do you propose to do about it, Princess? Run to your father? Tell your mother? I've served 3 monarchs in this kingdom, and I'll continue serving long after you've grown tired of playing at politics." The dismissive tone and condescending attitude crystallized something in Princess Evangeline's mind. This was exactly the problem she had been observing. The assumption that youth meant powerlessness, that respect was something to be earned through age and political maneuvering rather than something inherent to the office of queen. "You're absolutely right," she said quietly. "I am young, and I'm still learning about governance and politics. But There's one thing I understand perfectly clearly: respect. And you've just demonstrated that you have none for the crown, none for my mother, and apparently none for me either. Princess, I think you're overreacting to I'm not finished, Evangeline interrupted, her voice carrying a command that surprised even her. You just made your position very clear, Lord Aldrich. You serve the throne when it suits you, you respect authority when it aligns with your preferences, and you treat the Queen of Valdoria as if she were your subordinate rather than your sovereign. The Chancellor opened his mouth to respond, but Evangeline continued. Since you seem to believe that respect is negotiable and that your service comes with conditions, I think it's time you learned otherwise. Tomorrow morning, you will attend the Royal Council meeting. You will stand when my mother enters the room. You will address her with the proper titles and deference, and you will conduct yourself as befits someone in service to the crown. If you cannot do these simple things, then perhaps your decades of service have come to their natural conclusion. Lord Aldrich stared at her in astonishment. You cannot be serious. You're threatening to dismiss me? You have no such authority. Don't I? Evangeline asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I may be young, Lord Aldrich, but I am the heir to the throne of Valdoria. And while I cannot yet rule, I can certainly recommend to my parents that certain individuals have outlived their usefulness to the crown. The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, Lord Aldrich realized he had gravely underestimated the young princess. Her threat wasn't the tantrum of a child. It was the calculated response of someone who had been observing, learning, and planning. Princess, he said, his tone shifting to something approaching respect. Perhaps we could discuss this more reasonably. I assure you, any perceived slight toward the Queen was unintentional. Perceived? Evangeline's voice rose slightly. Lord Aldrich, you just spent 10 minutes explaining to me why my mother doesn't deserve your respect. How is that a perception rather than your clearly stated position? The Chancellor realized he had backed himself into a corner. His years of political experience had failed him against the simple, direct honesty of a 12-year-old who refused to accept his elaborate justifications for disrespectful behavior. What exactly are you asking of me? He said finally. I'm not asking anything, Evangeline replied. I'm telling you, tomorrow, you will demonstrate proper respect for Queen Isabella, or you will clear out your office. The choice is entirely yours, but the consequences will be entirely mine to determine. As Princess Evangeline walked away from the library, leaving Lord Aldrich alone with his thoughts, she felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. She had never wielded her authority so directly before, never made such a bold demand of a senior official. But as she thought about her mother's tired smile and the way the Queen's shoulders had sagged during dinner, she knew she had made the right decision. The next morning would reveal whether Lord Aldrich would choose respect or departure. But either way, Princess Evangeline had learned something important about power, dignity, and the responsibility that came with royal blood. The game of politics was about to change in Valdoria, and it would never be the same again. The dawn of the confrontation arrived with unusual stillness in Valdoria Palace. Princess Evangeline woke before her usual hour, her mind immediately focusing on the events she had set in motion the previous evening. As she dressed in her formal blue silk gown, a deliberate choice that matched her mother's favorite color, she reviewed her strategy for the day ahead. The Royal Council meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning, giving Lord Aldrich several hours to contemplate his response to her ultimatum. Evangeline had spent much of the night considering various scenarios. Would he comply with her demands? Would he call her bluff and force her to follow through on her threat? Or would he attempt to circumvent her entirely by appealing directly to her parents. As she made her way to the breakfast hall, Princess Evangeline encountered Lady Margaret, her mother's lady-in-waiting and closest confidant. Lady Margaret was a woman in her 40s with kind brown eyes and prematurely gray hair who had served the royal family with unwavering loyalty for nearly 2 decades. "Good morning, Princess," Lady Margaret said, offering a curtsy. "You're up quite early today." "Good morning, Lady Margaret. I wanted to speak with Mother before the council meeting. Is she available?" Lady Margaret's expression grew slightly concerned. "She's in her study, but she seemed troubled this morning. She mentioned having difficulty sleeping after last night's dinner with the Astrian delegates. I think Lord Aldrich's behavior during the meal upset her more than she cared to admit." This confirmation of her mother's distress only strengthened Evangeline's resolve. "Thank you for telling me. I believe I can help with that situation." "Oh," Lady Margaret raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" "You'll see soon enough," Evangeline replied with a mysterious smile. "But I think Mother's troubles with certain members of the council are about to be resolved." Princess Evangeline found Queen Isabella in her study, still in her mourning robe, staring out the window at the palace gardens. The Queen's usually perfect posture seemed diminished, and there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless night. "Mother," Evangeline said softly, knocking on the open door. Queen Isabella turned, her face brightening at the sight of her daughter. "Evangeline, my dear, you're up early. I wanted to speak with you before your council meeting today. May I come in?" "Of course." The Queen gestured to the comfortable chairs arranged near the fireplace. "I was just thinking about last night's dinner. I'm concerned that our guests may have gotten the wrong impression about our kingdom's stability." Evangeline settled into her chair, choosing her words carefully. "Mother, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day about respect and dignity. I've come to realize that some problems require direct action rather than patient endurance." Queen Isabella studied her daughter's face, noting the unusual seriousness in her expression. "What kind of direct action?" "The kind that ensures you receive the respect you deserve from everyone in service to the crown, regardless of their position or tenure." Before the Queen could respond, there was a gentle knock at the door. Sir Edmund, the Queen's private secretary, appeared with a formal expression that suggested important news. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing respectfully, "Lord Chancellor Aldrich has requested an urgent private audience with you before this morning's council meeting." He seemed quite agitated and insisted it was a matter of utmost importance. Princess Evangeline and Queen Isabella exchanged glances. Evangeline's stomach tightened with anticipation. Clearly, her conversation with the Chancellor had prompted some kind of response. "Did he indicate the nature of this urgent matter?" Queen Isabella asked. "No, Your Majesty, but he did mention something about needing to discuss recent developments regarding proper protocol and chain of command. He seemed particularly concerned about ensuring that all communications with the royal family follow appropriate channels." Evangeline smiled slightly. It appeared that Lord Aldrich intended to complain about her directly to the Queen, probably hoping to undermine her credibility by portraying her as an interfering child who had overstepped her bounds. "Mother," Evangeline said quietly, "before you meet with Lord Aldrich, there's something you should know." Over the next few minutes, Princess Evangeline related the previous evening's encounter with the Chancellor, including his dismissive attitude, his justifications for disrespecting the Queen, and her own ultimatum regarding his future conduct. Queen Isabella listened in stunned silence as her daughter described the conversation. When Evangeline finished, the Queen sat back in her chair, a complex mixture of emotions playing across her face. "Evangeline," she said finally, "what you did was incredibly bold, but also quite risky. Lord Aldrich is a powerful man with significant influence among the noble houses. If he chooses to make an enemy of you, then he'll discover that I'm not as easy a target as he assumed. Evangeline interrupted. Mother, someone needed to confront him about his behavior. You've been carrying this burden alone. Try to maintain dignity while being constantly undermined. That's not fair to you, and it's not good for the kingdom. Queen Isabella reached over and took her daughter's hand. My brave girl. But you realize that if Aldrich calls your bluff, if he refuses to change his behavior, you'll have to follow through on your threat. Are you prepared for that? I've been prepared since the moment I issued the ultimatum, Evangeline replied firmly. Either he learns to respect you, or he leaves. Those are the only acceptable options. Sir Edmund cleared his throat gently. Your Majesty, Lord Aldrich is waiting in the anteroom. Shall I show him in? Queen Isabella looked at her daughter, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, Edmund, and please ask Princess Evangeline to remain present during this meeting. Is that wise, Mother? Evangeline asked. He might feel ambushed. No, the Queen said, her voice growing stronger. If this conversation concerns your actions, you should be here to speak for yourself. Besides, it's time I stopped allowing others to make me feel like I need to handle these situations alone. When Lord Aldrich entered the study, his usual confident demeanor seemed slightly strained. He bowed formally to Queen Isabella, then offered a much shallower nod to Princess Evangeline, which did not go unnoticed by either woman. Your Majesty, he began, I must speak with you about a rather disturbing incident that occurred last evening. Your daughter has made some very serious accusations against me and issued what I can only describe as threats regarding my position and service to the crown. Queen Isabella maintained a neutral expression. I see. Please elaborate on these accusations and threats. Lord Aldrich shot a pointed look at Princess Evangeline before continuing. The princess seems to believe that I have been disrespectful toward you, Your Majesty. She has threatened to have me dismissed if I don't conform to her rather juvenile interpretation of proper protocol. Juvenile interpretation? Queen Isabella's voice carried a hint of steel. Lord Aldrich, are you suggesting that expecting basic respect for the reigning monarch is somehow an immature position? The Chancellor paused, realizing he had phrased his complaint poorly. Of course not, Your Majesty. But the princess appears to have misunderstood certain necessary aspects of effective counsel and governance. There are times when advisors must question decisions or seek clarification, even if such actions might be misinterpreted as disrespectful by someone lacking experience in political matters. Princess Evangeline spoke up, her voice calm but firm. Lord Aldrich, would you care to explain to my mother exactly what you told me last night about your loyalty being to the throne rather than to any individual who happens to occupy it temporarily? The Chancellor's face flushed. That statement was taken out of context. Really? Evangeline pulled out her small journal. Because I wrote it down immediately after our conversation. Would you like me to read your exact words? Queen Isabella held up a hand. That won't be necessary, Evangeline. She turned to face Lord Aldrich directly. However, I would like you to clarify your position, Lord Chancellor. Do you consider my authority as queen to be temporary? Do you view your service to me as conditional? The room fell silent as Lord Aldrich realized the trap he had walked into. Any answer he gave would either contradict his statement from the previous evening or confirm that he indeed viewed the Queen's authority as somehow lesser or temporary. Your Majesty, he said carefully, I have served the crown faithfully for over 3 decades. My loyalty to the institution of monarchy is absolute. That's not what I asked, Queen Isabella replied. I asked about your loyalty to me, specifically as your current monarch. Lord Aldrich's political instincts warred with his pride. He could humble himself and apologize, potentially saving his position, or he could maintain his stance and risk the consequences. Unfortunately for him, his pride won. Your Majesty, with respect, effective governance requires advisors who can provide honest counsel, even when that counsel challenges the monarch's preferences. If you prefer advisors who simply agree with everything you say, then perhaps you would be better served by different personnel. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Princess Evangeline watched her mother's face, seeing the moment when Queen Isabella's patient tolerance finally reached its limit. Lord Aldrich, the Queen said, her voice carrying the full authority of her position. You have just confirmed everything my daughter told me about your attitude and behavior. You view counsel as an opportunity to challenge rather than advise. You consider respect to be optional based on your personal assessment of my worthiness, and you apparently believe that your decades of service grant you the right to treat the crown as your subordinate rather than your sovereign. Your Majesty, I never said— You said enough, Queen Isabella interrupted. Princess Evangeline gave you an opportunity last night to reconsider your approach and demonstrate appropriate respect. Instead, you chose to come here and essentially repeat the same disrespectful sentiments that caused the problem in the first place. Lord Aldrich's eyes widened as he realized the conversation was not going as he had planned. Your Majesty, surely we can resolve this misunderstanding without— There is no misunderstanding, the Queen said firmly. There is simply a senior advisor who has forgotten that respect for the crown is not negotiable, regardless of his personal opinions about the individual wearing it. Princess Evangeline felt a surge of pride watching her mother assert her authority with such clarity and strength. This was the queen she knew her mother could be when she wasn't being constantly undermined and second-guessed. Lord Aldrich, Queen Isabella continued, you have two choices. You can offer a sincere apology for your disrespectful behavior, commit to treating the crown with appropriate deference in all future interactions, and hope that I'm willing to overlook your recent conduct. Or you can maintain your current position and face the consequences of your decision to prioritize your pride over your service to the kingdom. The Chancellor stood silent for a long moment, his face cycling through various emotions. Finally, his pride made the decision for him. Your Majesty, he said stiffly, I believe my years of service speak for themselves. If you feel that my counsel and experience are no longer valued, then perhaps it would be best for all concerned if I were to seek a position where my capabilities are better appreciated. Queen Isabella nodded slowly. Very well. Thank you for making this easier, Lord Aldrich. You have until the end of the week to transition your responsibilities and vacate your office. The dismissal was so calm and matter-of-fact that it took a moment for Lord Aldrich to process what had just happened. When the reality hit him, his carefully maintained composure cracked. Your Majesty, you cannot be serious. I have served this kingdom faithfully for over 3 decades. Yes, you've mentioned that several times, Queen Isabella replied. Unfortunately, faithful service includes respecting the monarch you serve, and you have made it abundantly clear that such respect is beneath you. As Lord Aldrich left the study in shocked silence, Princess Evangeline and Queen Isabella sat in the quiet aftermath of the confrontation. The young princess had learned that sometimes standing up for what's right requires accepting the consequences of bold action, while the queen had rediscovered the strength that came from refusing to accept disrespect disguised as counsel. The council meeting scheduled for later that morning would certainly be interesting. News of Lord Chancellor Aldrich's dismissal spread through Valdoria Palace with the speed of wildfire. By the time the Royal Council meeting convened at 10 o'clock, Every member of the senior staff had heard at least 3 different versions of the story, each more dramatic than the last. What remained consistent across all accounts was the central fact. Princess Evangeline had somehow engineered the downfall of one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. The council chamber itself seemed to buzz with nervous energy as the various ministers, advisors, and officials took their seats around a massive oak table that had hosted royal deliberations for over 2 centuries. The ornate room, with its tapestries depicting Valdorian military victories and portraits of former monarchs, had witnessed countless political dramas, but rarely had a 12-year-old princess been at the center of such upheaval. Queen Isabella entered the chamber at precisely 10 o'clock, with Princess Evangeline walking beside her, an unusual arrangement that immediately caught everyone's attention. Typically, the princess would attend council meetings as an observer, seated in a chair along the wall. Today, however, a second chair had been placed at the head of the table, directly to the Queen's right. The reaction was immediate and telling. Every person in the room stood respectfully as the Queen entered, their postures noticeably more formal than usual. The empty chair where Lord Aldrich normally sat served as a stark reminder of the morning's events. "Good morning," Queen Isabella said as she took her seat, gesturing for the others to follow suit. "Before we begin today's agenda, I believe it's appropriate to address the change in our council's composition." Lord Pemberton, the elderly finance minister, cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, we understand that Lord Aldrich has departed his position. Might I ask if you plan to name a replacement immediately?" "In time, Lord Pemberton. For now, Princess Evangeline will be participating more actively in council deliberations as part of her preparation for future leadership responsibilities." This announcement sent subtle ripples of surprise through the assembled officials. Several exchanged meaningful glances, clearly recalibrating their understanding of a young princess's role within the royal hierarchy. Sir Geoffrey, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, a middle-aged man with diplomatic instincts that had served the kingdom well in international negotiations, spoke up carefully. "Your Majesty, might I say that the princess showed remarkable initiative in recent days. Her observations regarding protocol and respect have certainly prompted valuable self-reflection among the staff." Princess Evangeline recognized the carefully chosen words for what they were, an attempt to gauge the political winds and align himself appropriately with the new reality. She also noticed that Sir Geoffrey had made a point of standing when she and her mother had entered, something she couldn't recall him doing consistently in the past. "Thank you, Sir Geoffrey," Queen Isabella replied. "The princess has indeed demonstrated a keen understanding of the importance of mutual respect within our governmental structure. I trust that understanding will be shared by all members of this council." The message was clear. The new standard established by Evangeline's confrontation with Lord Aldrich was now expected to be the norm, not the exception. Lady Cordelia, the Minister of Education, and one of only 2 women on the council, leaned forward slightly. "Your Majesty, if I may say so, recent events have highlighted something I've long believed, that age and experience, while valuable, should never be confused with wisdom or good judgment. The princess's actions demonstrate a clarity of vision that, frankly, some of us older officials might do well to emulate." This was a more direct show of support than Evangeline had expected, and she felt a wave of gratitude toward Lady Cordelia. The education minister had always been respectful toward Queen Isabella, but she had never been particularly vocal in council meetings. Her willingness to speak up now suggested that Evangeline's actions had emboldened others who had been uncomfortable with the previous dynamic. "Lord Pemberton, perhaps sensing the shifting political landscape, added his own commentary. Indeed, Your Majesty, I must confess that recent events have prompted me to reflect on my own conduct. If there have been occasions when my behavior has fallen short of the respect due to the crown, I sincerely apologize and pledge to do better going forward. Princess Evangeline was beginning to understand one of the most important lessons of political leadership. Sometimes one dramatic action could accomplish more than months of subtle pressure. Lord Aldrich's dismissal had sent a clear message about consequences, and the other officials were responding accordingly. However, not everyone in the room seemed entirely comfortable with the new dynamic. General Morrison, the Minister of Defense, and a longtime ally of Lord Aldrich, maintained a neutral expression that suggested internal conflict. He was a career military man in his 50s who had worked closely with the former Chancellor on matters of national security. Your Majesty, General Morrison said carefully, while I certainly support maintaining proper respect for the Crown, I hope that the recent changes won't discourage honest debate and discussion during council meetings. Effective governance does require the ability to examine different perspectives and challenge assumptions, even when such discussions might become heated. This was a more subtle challenge than Lord Aldrich's direct confrontation, but Princess Evangeline recognized it as a test. General Morrison was essentially asking whether the new emphasis on respect would prevent officials from doing their jobs effectively. Queen Isabella looked at her daughter, silently inviting her to respond. Evangeline took a breath, understanding that her answer would help define her role and credibility within a council. General Morrison, she began, her voice calm but confident, I think there's an important distinction to be made between challenging ideas and challenging authority. When Lord Aldrich questioned my mother's decisions about grain subsidies, for example, he wasn't presenting alternative policy options for consideration. He was undermining her credibility in front of the Agricultural Committee. There's a difference between saying, have we considered this alternative approach? And saying the Queen's judgment on this matter is questionable. The general nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. That's a fair distinction, Princess. Perhaps you could elaborate on how you envision healthy debate functioning within this new framework. Evangeline had been thinking about this exact question since the previous evening. I believe effective counsel involves presenting facts, offering alternatives, and asking clarifying questions in a way that strengthens the monarchy's decision-making process rather than weakening its authority. If an advisor disagrees with the proposed policy, they should present evidence and alternatives that help the Crown make better decisions, not simply criticize the Crown's judgment. Sir Geoffrey leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. That's a remarkably sophisticated understanding of the advisory role, Princess. It suggests that respect and effective counsel are not only compatible, but actually reinforcing. Exactly, Evangeline replied. Respect creates the trust necessary for honest communication, while honest communication demonstrates the respect due to the Crown's ultimate decision-making authority. Lord Pemberton chuckled softly. I'm beginning to think Lord Aldrich's departure might be the best thing that's happened to this council in years. No offense to his years of service, but perhaps we had all become too comfortable with a certain informality in our deliberations. The meeting continued with discussions of trade negotiations, infrastructure projects, and diplomatic matters. Princess Evangeline observed carefully, noting how the dynamic had indeed shifted. Officials were more careful with their language, more deferential in their presentations, but, paradoxically, the discussions seemed more productive than she remembered from previous meetings she had attended. Without the undercurrent of challenge to Queen Isabella's authority that Lord Aldrich had fostered, The other officials seemed more focused on problem-solving rather than political positioning. They presented options and recommendations with clear deference to the Queen's final authority, which seemed to make the decision-making process more efficient rather than more restrictive. However, the real test came when Sir Geoffrey presented a complex foreign policy situation involving trade disputes with neighboring kingdoms. The issue was genuinely complicated, with valid arguments on multiple sides and potential consequences for either course of action. Your Majesty, Sir Geoffrey concluded his presentation. This is precisely the type of situation where honest debate among advisors can help illuminate the best path forward. I have strong opinions about the preferred approach, but I recognize that others might see different priorities or potential outcomes. Queen Isabella looked around the table. I'd like to hear all perspectives on this matter before making a decision. Please, everyone, speak freely. What followed was exactly the kind of robust discussion that General Morrison had expressed concern about potentially losing. Officials presented different viewpoints, challenged each other's assumptions, and raised difficult questions about potential consequences. However, the entire discussion was framed around helping the Queen make the best decision, rather than questioning her competence to make any decision at all. Princess Evangeline watched in fascination as the council demonstrated that respect and honest debate were indeed compatible. When Lord Pemberton disagreed with Lady Cordelia's assessment of potential economic impacts, he presented his contrary evidence respectfully and acknowledged the validity of her concerns even while offering different conclusions. When General Morrison raised security concerns about Sir Geoffrey's recommended diplomatic approach, he did so by presenting specific risks for the Queen's consideration rather than dismissing the foreign minister's judgment. The discussion was vigorous and comprehensive, but it never devolved into the kind of personal challenges to authority that had characterized Lord Aldrich's participation in previous meetings. After nearly an hour of deliberation, Queen Isabella synthesized the various perspectives into a decision that incorporated elements from multiple recommendations. Thank you all for this excellent discussion. Your various insights have helped me develop an approach that addresses both the diplomatic and security concerns while maintaining our economic interests. As the meeting concluded and officials began filing out of the chamber, several stopped to offer respectful words to both Queen Isabella and Princess Evangeline. The shift in dynamic was palpable, where once there had been barely concealed tension and political maneuvering, there was now a sense of collaborative purpose. Sir Geoffrey paused as he gathered his papers. Your Majesty, Princess Evangeline, I hope you'll forgive my saying so, but today's meeting was the most productive council session I've attended in years. Perhaps necessary changes sometimes require bold actions to implement. After the chamber had emptied except for mother and daughter, Queen Isabella turned to Evangeline with a mixture of pride and amazement. My dear, she said, I'm not sure whether to congratulate you on your political instincts or worry about the power you discovered you possess. Evangeline smiled. Maybe a little of both, Mother. But I think we've learned something important about leadership today. What's that? That sometimes the most effective way to improve a situation is to stop tolerating the problems that make it worse. Queen Isabella laughed, the sound lighter and more relaxed than Evangeline had heard in months. Indeed, though I suspect our real test will come when news of today's events reaches the noble houses and Lord Aldrich's allies. Are you prepared for that challenge? Princess Evangeline straightened in her chair, her expression serious but determined. I think the question isn't whether I'm prepared, but whether they're prepared for me. The game of palace politics had indeed changed in Valdoria, and the ripple effects were only beginning to be felt throughout the kingdom. Within 48 hours of Lord Aldrich's dismissal, the political landscape of Aldoria had shifted dramatically. The news had spread far beyond the palace walls, reaching the noble houses, merchant guilds, and common citizens throughout the kingdom. The reactions varied wildly depending on the listener's relationship with the former chancellor and their opinion of the royal family's recent governance. In the ornate sitting room of the Blackwood estate, one of the most powerful noble houses in Valdoria, an emergency gathering was taking place. Duke Marcus Blackwood, an imposing man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and calculating eyes, had summoned several other prominent nobles to discuss what they viewed as a concerning development in royal politics. "Gentlemen," the Duke began, addressing the assembled lords, "we find ourselves facing an unprecedented situation. A child, and a female child at that, has apparently manipulated the Queen into dismissing one of our most experienced advisors. Baron Hartwell, a nervous man with thinning hair who had always been intimidated by Lord Aldrich's political acumen, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Perhaps, Duke Blackwood, we should consider that Lord Aldrich's dismissal might have been warranted. There have been whispers about his treatment of Queen Isabella." The Duke's expression darkened. "Whispers, Baron? Since when do we make political decisions based on whispers?" Aldrich was a stabilizing force in the kingdom, a voice of experience and reason. His removal suggests that the royal family has become dangerously susceptible to emotional decision-making. Earl Pembroke, a younger nobleman who had always harbored ambitions for greater political influence, leaned forward eagerly. "What are you suggesting, Duke? That we challenge the Queen's authority directly?" "I'm suggesting," Duke Blackwood replied carefully, "that we may need to take steps to ensure the kingdom's stability. If a 12-year-old princess can orchestrate the dismissal of senior officials, what does that say about the current leadership's judgment?" Meanwhile, in the palace's private gardens, Princess Evangeline was having a very different conversation with her grandmother, the Dowager Queen Marianne. The elderly woman, now in her 70s but still sharp and commanding, had requested a private walk to discuss recent events. "My dear granddaughter," the Dowager Queen began, her voice carrying the weight of decades of political experience, "you have stirred up quite a hornet's nest with your recent actions." Evangeline walked beside her grandmother along the rose-lined pathways, considering her response carefully. "Grandmother, do you think I was wrong to confront Lord Aldrich?" The Dowager Queen paused beside a marble fountain, her wise blue eyes studying her granddaughter's face. "Wrong? No, child. Necessary? Absolutely. Dangerous? Most certainly." "Dangerous how?" "Because," the older woman explained, "you have demonstrated a level of political awareness and decisiveness that threatens certain established power structures. There are nobles who benefited from Lord Aldrich's influence, who counted on his ability to moderate royal decisions in ways that serve their interests." Evangeline felt a chill of understanding. "You mean they used him to manipulate Mother's policies?" "Indirectly, yes. Aldrich wasn't corrupt in the traditional sense, but his constant challenges to your mother's authority created opportunities for others to influence decisions through him. By removing him, you've eliminated a crucial tool in their political arsenal." The Dowager Queen resumed walking, her pace measured and thoughtful. "Which brings us to the current situation. I've received word that Duke Blackwood is organizing what he calls concerned discussions among the noble houses. They're framing your actions as evidence that the crown has become unstable and unpredictable." This revelation troubled Evangeline more than she cared to admit. "What do you think they're planning?" "Probably nothing treasonous," her grandmother assured her, "but they may attempt to pressure your parents into reinstating Aldrich or accepting a replacement of their choosing." They'll argue that experienced counsel is essential for effective governance. And if Mother refuses? The Dowager Queen smiled grimly. Then we'll discover just how far they're willing to push their challenges to royal authority. But there's something else you should know, my dear. What's that? Your actions have also garnered significant support among groups that felt marginalized by Aldrich's influence. The merchants' guilds, for instance, are quite pleased. They felt that Aldrich consistently favored the agricultural interests over trade and commerce. Several of them have sent letters expressing their support for the Queen's decision. This was encouraging news, but Evangeline sensed there was more to her grandmother's assessment. Additionally, the Dowager Queen continued, many of the younger nobles, those who felt excluded from Aldrich's inner circle, are viewing recent events as an opportunity for positive change. They see you as representing a new approach to leadership that values merit over established connections. So we have both enemies and allies. Indeed. The question is which group will prove more influential in the coming weeks. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Sir Edmund, who was clearly agitated about something urgent. Your Majesty, he said, bowing to the Dowager Queen, and then to Evangeline, forgive the interruption, but there's been a development that requires immediate attention. Duke Blackwood has requested a formal audience with Queen Isabella, and he's brought Lord Aldrich with him. Evangeline's stomach tightened. Lord Aldrich is here? At the palace? Yes, Princess. They're waiting in the formal reception hall, along with several other nobles. Duke Blackwood has presented this as a matter of urgent concern regarding the kingdom's governmental stability. The Dowager Queen's expression grew serious. How many nobles accompanied them? 7, Your Majesty, all from prominent houses with significant political influence. Evangeline understood immediately that this wasn't a simple request for reconsideration. It was a coordinated political pressure campaign. The nobles were essentially attempting to force Queen Isabella to reverse her decision by presenting it as a united front of the kingdom's most influential families. Where is Mother now? Evangeline asked. The Queen is in her study, reviewing the formal petition they've submitted. She's asked that you join her before the audience begins. As they walked quickly toward the palace, the Dowager Queen offered her granddaughter some crucial advice. Evangeline, what happens in the next hour may determine not only your mother's authority, but your own future role in this kingdom. Duke Blackwood is a formidable political opponent who has been waiting years for an opportunity to increase his influence over royal policy. Don't underestimate his ability to manipulate the situation to his advantage. What should I do? Be yourself, the older woman replied. You've demonstrated remarkable instincts so far. Trust them, but remember that Blackwood will attempt to portray you as an impulsive child who doesn't understand the complexities of governance. Don't let him bait you into emotional responses. When they reached Queen Isabella's study, they found her reading through a lengthy document with a troubled expression. She looked up as they entered, relief evident in her eyes. Mother, Evangeline, thank goodness you're here. Duke Blackwood has presented what he calls a formal petition for governmental stability. It's essentially a demand that I reinstate Lord Aldrich and accept a council of noble advisors to ensure future decisions are made with proper consultation. Evangeline felt anger rise in her chest. They're trying to force you to reverse your decision? More than that, Queen Isabella replied grimly. They're attempting to establish precedent that major personnel decisions must be approved by the noble houses. If I agree to this, it will fundamentally alter the balance of power in our kingdom. The Dowager Queen studied the petition over her daughter-in-law's shoulder. This is cleverly written. They framed their demands as concerns for governmental stability rather than challenges to royal authority. It makes resistance seem unreasonable, but it is a challenge to royal authority, Evangeline protested. They're essentially saying Mother can't make decisions without their approval. Precisely, the Dowager Queen agreed. But they've disguised it as helpful counsel from concerned citizens. Duke Blackwood is quite skilled at political manipulation. Queen Isabella set down the petition with a determined expression. Well, then, perhaps it's time for them to discover that this particular manipulation won't work. Evangeline, I want you present during this audience. If they're going to challenge decisions you influenced, you should be there to defend them. Are you certain that's wise? The Dowager Queen asked. Blackwood will certainly attempt to use her presence against you. Let him try. Queen Isabella replied firmly. My daughter has shown more political courage and wisdom in recent days than some of my advisors have demonstrated in years. If Duke Blackwood wants to challenge our family's judgment, he can do so to our faces. As they prepared to face the assembled nobles, Princess Evangeline realized that the confrontation with Lord Aldrich had been merely the opening move in a much larger political game. The real test of her actions and her mother's authority was about to begin. The walk to the formal reception hall felt longer than usual, each step bringing them closer to a confrontation that would determine whether the changes Evangeline had initiated would survive their first serious challenge. Duke Blackwood was waiting, along with his political allies and the man whose dismissal had started it all. The stage was set for a battle that would define the future of royal authority in Valdoria. The formal reception hall of Valdoria Palace had rarely hosted such a politically charged gathering. The magnificent room, with its soaring ceilings decorated with gold leaf and crystal chandeliers that had illuminated royal ceremonies for generations, now served as the arena for a confrontation that would determine the kingdom's political future. Duke Blackwood stood near the center of the assembled nobles, his imposing presence commanding attention even in the opulent surroundings. Lord Aldrich remained slightly behind him, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes betraying a mixture of hope and apprehension. The other nobles, Earls Pembroke and Westfield, Barons Hartwell and Manning, Lord Fairfax, and Count Ashford, formed a loose semicircle that suggested unity of purpose without appearing overtly threatening. When Queen Isabella entered the hall, followed closely by Princess Evangeline and the Dowager Queen Marianne, the subtle power dynamics immediately shifted. The nobles bowed respectfully, but there was a calculated precision to their movements that suggested rehearsed choreography rather than spontaneous respect. Your Majesty, Duke Blackwood began, his voice carrying the resonant authority of a man accustomed to being heard. Thank you for agreeing to this urgent audience. We come before you today, not as critics, but as loyal servants of the crown who have grave concerns about recent developments affecting the kingdom's stability. Queen Isabella took her position on the ornate throne that dominated one end of the hall, while Princess Evangeline and the Dowager Queen arranged themselves in chairs to her right, a visual reminder of the continuity and strength of the royal line. Duke Blackwood, the Queen replied, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. I have reviewed your petition. Before we proceed, I want to ensure I understand your position correctly. Are you suggesting that the dismissal of Lord Aldrich was inappropriate? Your Majesty, the Duke responded diplomatically. We are suggesting that such significant decisions should be made with broader consultation, particularly when they affect individuals whose experience and knowledge are vital to the kingdom's governance. Earl Pembroke stepped forward slightly, adding his voice to the carefully orchestrated presentation. Your Majesty, Lord Aldrich has served 3 monarchs faithfully for over 30 years. His institutional knowledge and political relationships are irreplaceable assets to the crown. Princess Evangeline watched the proceedings with growing understanding of the sophisticated political theater being performed. The nobles were essentially arguing that Lord Aldrich's value to the kingdom outweighed any personal conflicts with the royal family, while simultaneously implying that such conflicts were based on misunderstandings rather than legitimate grievances. Lord Aldrich himself finally spoke, his voice carrying a tone of wounded dignity that was clearly calculated for maximum effect. "Your Majesty, if I have given offense through my service, it was never intentional. Perhaps in my zeal to provide thorough counsel, I have sometimes appeared overly direct. I stand ready to adjust my approach if given the opportunity to continue serving the crown." The apology was technically present, but it was wrapped in justifications that essentially repeated his original position, that his disrespectful behavior had been misinterpreted zealous service rather than genuine disrespect. Queen Isabella looked at her daughter, silently inviting her to respond. This was Princess Evangeline's moment to defend her actions and demonstrate the political acumen that had initiated these events. "Lord Aldrich," Evangeline began, her voice clear and confident despite her youth, "your apology suggests that the problem was a misunderstanding about your intentions rather than a fundamental disagreement about respect and authority. Is that correct?" The former chancellor hesitated, recognizing the trap in the question. If he agreed that it was merely a misunderstanding, he would be admitting that his behavior had indeed been disrespectful. If he denied it was a misunderstanding, he would be confirming that his disrespect had been intentional. "Princess," he replied carefully, "I believe that effective counsel sometimes requires frank discussion, even when such discussions might appear challenging to those less familiar with governmental processes." Duke Blackwood intervened smoothly, clearly recognizing that Lord Aldrich was not handling the questioning well. "Your Majesty, Princess Evangeline, surely the important question is not whether there were disagreements about style or approach, but whether the kingdom benefit from Lord Aldrich's continued service despite such minor conflicts." Minor conflicts? Princess Evangeline's voice carried a note of incredulity that was perfectly pitched. "Duke Blackwood, Lord Aldrich told me directly that his loyalty was to the throne rather than to any individual who happens to occupy it temporarily. Are you suggesting that openly questioning the legitimacy of my mother's authority is a minor stylistic difference?" The statement hit the assembled nobles like a physical blow. Several exchanged glances, clearly not having been told about the full extent of Lord Aldrich's comments during his confrontation with the princess. Baron Hartwell, who had always been more uncomfortable with political confrontation than his colleagues, spoke up uncertainly. "Princess, surely Lord Aldrich didn't mean to imply." "He meant exactly what he said," Evangeline replied firmly. "He viewed my mother's reign as temporary and conditional, subject to his personal assessment of her worthiness. That's not zealous counsel. That's fundamental disrespect for the institution of monarchy itself." The Dowager Queen chose this moment to add her voice to the discussion, her decades of political experience evident in her strategic timing. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the weight of her years and position, "I have lived through the reigns of 4 monarchs in this kingdom. I have seen advisors who served with distinction and others who confuse their advisory role with governing authority. What Princess Evangeline has described is not a matter of style. It's a matter of fundamental understanding about the relationship between the crown and its servants." Duke Blackwood recognized that the conversation was not proceeding as he had planned. The royal family was presenting a united front, and Lord Aldrich's own words were undermining the carefully constructed narrative about misunderstood intentions. "Your Majesty," he said, shifting tactics, "even if there were disagreements about approach, surely the kingdom's need for experienced counsel outweighs personal conflicts. The stability of our government depends on institutional continuity." Queen Isabella leaned forward slightly, her expression growing more serious. "Duke Blackwood, are you suggesting that no advisor, regardless of their behavior toward the crown, should ever be dismissed? That the need for their expertise grants them immunity from consequences?" "Of course not, Your Majesty, but because the Queen continued, that would suggest that the crown serves its advisors rather than the advisors serving the crown. It would fundamentally reverse the proper order of authority in our kingdom." Earl Westfield, who had been silent until now, attempted a different approach. "Your Majesty, perhaps the issue isn't whether Lord Aldrich's dismissal was justified, but whether the decision-making process was comprehensive enough to consider all implications." Princess Evangeline recognized this as an attack on her influence over the decision, an attempt to portray her as an impulsive child whose interference had prevented proper deliberation. "Earl Westfield," she replied, "are you suggesting that witnessing disrespectful behavior, documenting it carefully, addressing it directly with the individual involved, and only then bringing it to my mother's attention was somehow hasty or incomplete?" "Well, no, Princess, but perhaps, because I can provide you with specific dates, times, and witnesses to Lord Aldrich's disrespectful behavior if you'd like to review the comprehensiveness of my documentation." The challenge hung in the air. Earl Westfield clearly had not expected such a detailed response, and his attempt to portray the princess as impulsive had backfired spectacularly. Lord Aldrich, perhaps sensing that his chances of reinstatement were diminishing, made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "Your Majesty, I acknowledge that my approach may have been flawed. I am prepared to offer a formal apology and commit to modified conduct if given the opportunity to continue serving the kingdom." Queen Isabella studied the former chancellor for a long moment before responding. "Lord Aldrich, the issue isn't whether you're willing to apologize now that you've faced consequences. The issue is whether someone who fundamentally views the crown's authority as conditional can ever truly serve it effectively." "Your Majesty," Duke Blackwood interjected, "surely redemption and growth are possible. Dismissing experienced personnel based on single incidents seems..." "Single incidents?" Princess Evangeline interrupted. "Duke Blackwood, would you like me to detail the pattern of behavior I documented over several months? Because I assure you, this was not a single incident, but a consistent pattern of disrespect that culminated in Lord Aldrich explicitly stating his conditional loyalty to my mother." The Duke realized that his strategy was completely failing. Instead of pressuring the royal family into backing down, the confrontation was allowing them to demonstrate their unity, competence, and clear reasoning. Moreover, Princess Evangeline was proving to be a far more formidable opponent than he had anticipated. Count Ashford made one last attempt to salvage something from the encounter. "Your Majesty, even if Lord Aldrich's reinstatement isn't possible, surely the broader question of advisory consultation deserves consideration. The noble houses have a legitimate interest in ensuring stable governance." Queen Isabella's expression grew cold. "Count Ashford, are you suggesting that major governmental decisions should require approval from the noble houses? Because that would represent a fundamental change to our constitutional monarchy." The Count realized he had overstepped. "Of course not, Your Majesty. I merely meant..." "You meant," the Dowager Queen interjected sharply, that the noble houses should have veto power over royal personnel decisions. That is precisely the kind of constitutional overreach that threatens the stability you claim to be protecting. The silence that followed was deafening. The assembled nobles had attempted to use collective pressure to force a reversal of Lord Aldrich's dismissal, but instead they had been systematically dismantled by the royal family's superior preparation and political acumen. Duke Blackwood, recognizing that continued confrontation would only damage his position further, attempted a strategic retreat. "Your Majesty," he said with forced dignity, "we have presented our concerns as loyal subjects. If you believe the current course serves the kingdom's interests, we naturally defer to your judgment." "Thank you, Duke Blackwood," Queen Isabella replied graciously. "I appreciate your concern for governmental stability. However, I believe that true stability comes from maintaining proper respect for constitutional authority, not from preserving individuals who challenge that authority." As the nobles filed out of the reception hall, their carefully orchestrated political pressure campaign thoroughly defeated, Princess Evangeline reflected on the lessons of the encounter. She had learned that political courage, when backed by careful preparation and principled reasoning, could overcome even coordinated opposition from powerful interests. After the hall had emptied, the Dowager Queen turned to her granddaughter with an expression of genuine admiration. "My dear Evangeline," she said, "you have just participated in one of the most decisive political victories I've witnessed in decades. You not only defended your original actions, but demonstrated the kind of leadership that will serve this kingdom well in the years to come." Queen Isabella embraced her daughter, her eyes shining with pride and relief. "You were magnificent, my brave girl. But more than that, you were right. Sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is refuse to accept behavior that undermines the very foundation of their authority." Princess Evangeline smiled, feeling the weight and satisfaction of a lesson well learned. "I think I'm beginning to understand what you meant about choosing our battles carefully, Mother. Sometimes the most important battle is the one that establishes you won't tolerate being disrespected." "Indeed," the Queen agreed. "And now, thanks to your courage, that battle has been won." The political crisis that had threatened to undermine Queen Isabella's authority was over, but the lessons learned and precedents established would echo through Valdorian politics for generations to come. Princess Evangeline had not only defended her mother's dignity, she had demonstrated that even the youngest members of the royal family possessed the wisdom and strength necessary to protect the crown's authority. The kingdom was stronger for her intervention, and the future looked brighter than it had in years.